Welcome back, everybody. Joshua's Magic, a channel about the intersection of spirituality and mundane things. Today, we're going to be talking about healing and considering this topic from the subject of the Alice Bailey writings. So, some of the quotes are going to be more related to today, and others are going to be related to future aspects of healing. And you can find these on my Instagram or Minds page, link in the description below. But let us move on to the first quote. This one's a little bit about the future of healing, I think. Through other groups, another type of energy must flow, producing another type of interrelation and communication. These groups will bring about right healing of personalities of individuals in all aspects of their nature. The work intended is the intelligent transmission of energy to the various parts of the nature, mental, astral, and physical, astral meaning emotional, of the human being, and through the right circulation and organization of force. Healing must eventually be carried forward by groups which act as intermediaries between the plane of spiritual energy, either soul energy, intuitional energy, or will energy, and the patient or group of patients. This last point is to be noted. The group idea must always be remembered, for this will distinguish the New Age methods from the past. The work will be group work for the group. The members will work as souls, not as individuals. They will learn to communicate healing energy from the reservoir of living force to the patients. So this is obviously getting towards some future healing work that'll be done. And when he says New Age, he means actually this New Age, the Aquarian Age. The term New Age now has kind of been watered down to mean all sorts of things. But there's actually this new, better age coming, and slowly we'll be entering it. So that's what he means by in the New Age, not just the New Age movement as it's sort of currently defined. But on the substance of what he's saying here is when groups get together, they can be a channel for more higher, more intense energies than an individual could. And then they can direct that energy towards various ends, in this case, healing. And the soul operates in group formation, in a sense, that the soul's purposes aren't really for individuals. And if they appear to be for an individual, it's because that individual has a role in helping the wider group. So the Piscean age in history had a lot of more focus on individuals and what they can do and what they can bring to helping of society. But in the Aquarian age and moving forward, the focus is going to be more on groups of people, what they're able to initiate and achieve, because they'll be reflecting the level of the soul better than was possible by individuals in the past, in a sense. So move on to the next day's quote. This is another interesting one about the future and some what healing might be achieved there about fire. Behind humanity lies a very ancient past, wherein so-called sins and errors, wrongdoing, and wrong attitudes have piled up a very heavy karma, which, fortunate for the race of men, is being rapidly worked off at this time. The immense interest in disease, which is displayed today, and focusing of all the resources of medical and surgical science on the behalf of fighting forces, resources later to be mobilized in the aid of the civilized populations of the devastated countries in both hemispheres. The widespread research being carried out in our hospitals and centers of learning and the rapid discoveries of science must, plus a steady trend towards a much-needed simplification, will before long bring about major changes in the approach to disease. These will lead to the eradication of many of the dreaded inherent diseases. And so this was written, I believe, during or around World War II. So this is kind of what the time period he's focusing on here contemporarily. So the forces that were mobilized in healing the sick during the war, he says, need to be put to other use after that. I'm not sure how much of that happened, but that's what he was hoping for. The inspiration and the inflow of occult knowledge via the disciples and initiates of the world will bring about many alterations in technique. The coming revelation of new yet most simple laws of health and the blending which will inevitably come of orthodox medicine, psychology, and spiritual methods of healing will produce an entirely new approach to the entire subject. The increasing use of fire as a means of purification, both in relation to the soil of the planet and to the human frame, will do much. Of this, the technique of inducing fever as a means of curing certain forms of disease, and the method, frequently employed by nature, of subjecting large areas of soil to the impact of fire, will be developed into a new and most helpful science. This, however, will come later. I indicate simply faint trends in that direction. Man stands in all fields of knowledge at a climaxing point. This has been induced by the rapid unfoldment of human consciousness, and it prefaces a great expansion of the understanding and the new insight into the conditioning causes which are responsible for much that today distresses man's physical body. So this fire thing is sort of interesting to contemplate, that in multiple ways the use of fire for purification can heal. One way that springs to mind is this sort of inner spiritual fire of that applying to a person in the right way, that you might eliminate some of the lower etheric, astral, and mental atoms of their body and stimulate them to the higher state of consciousness. But that's just an indication of some things that might come in the future. On to the next quote. We have one about instantaneous healing. On instantaneous healing. Instantaneous healing may be of various kinds. We might cite the following from several possibilities which account for the happening. 1. The healing which is the result of a definite practice, conscious or unconscious, of Hatha Yoga. This is brought about by a projection of purely physical magnetism, which, added to the quota of available physical magnetism at the patient's disposal within his own physical body, suffices to effect an immediate cure. The magnetism in the body of the patient, instead of being outgoing and radiating, becomes inverted and turns inward to make its contribution to the reservoir of physical force held in a static condition within the body. The more low-grade human types produce this kind of healing with facility. This is equally so in relation to the patient and the healer. The case cited is a case in this point, and he's referring to, I guess, something else that maybe was brought up in a different part of the book. The healing was more easily brought about by the sheik concerned because the wound, a bite in the arm, was self-inflicted, and before inflicting it, the patient, if I may so call him, held the outgoing force in abeyance by an act of will, thus creating a reservoir of energy which was available to supplement that of the sheik, which was in turn released by a mantram. This is definitely not spiritual healing. So I guess what he's saying in this outline, I'm not sure if the sheik bit his own arm or somebody else bit his own arm, but assuming it's the sheik, so he bit his own arm, but he, through an act of will, didn't put his physical force outgoing and like kept it within himself, and then he was able to use a mantram to facilitate the healing. And so he says that's not spiritual at all, actually. It's just sort of etheric or physical in nature. And it's funny he makes this distinction because a lot of people, anything that's non-physical, people consider spiritual. But there's a number of things that aren't really spiritual, though they are non-material, like the emotional astral plane, that's not really truly spiritual. The lower mental plane is not truly spiritual. They're just non-physical things. So he takes a more expanded view of what actually spiritual is, or maybe a narrower view. But so that's one form of instantaneous healing. The second one says there is also that form of healing which can be instantaneous because the disease is largely psychological and hallucinatory. The healer is then in a position to enable the patient to throw off illusion and so stand free. The will of the healer, when added to that of the patient, aids in the breaking of the illusion and of the glamorous thought forms and the patient then stands free. This is a psychological healing and only one illustration of it. So another instantaneous way somebody can be healed is if they're being affected by some sort of illusion or thought form, whether it's, one of their own creation or something that's put out there that they somehow tapped into. But, you can see it like somebody thinks like, oh, I'm a fraud, I'm no good. Um, and if the healer can, through an act of will, help stimulate the patient's will, that can be thrown off. And it's like, oh, I don't need to think that. Why do I have to think that I'm no good? So there's kind of instantaneous psychological healing in that instance. And on the third type that he lists, he says, when there is a type of healing which is brought about in two ways, and this is true spiritual healing. When the patient makes a sudden and frequently unexpected contact with his soul, and in which the soul energy is so great and so potent that it sweeps through the vehicles and definitely produces effects. Thus, cures are brought about in the same vehicle or another, and frequently in the physical vehicle. The physical condition or disease retains, so oft, the undivided attention of the consciousness of the human being involved, and the soul pours through to the point of concentrated attention. In this thought lies for many of you a clear hint. B. When the patient's evil karma is exhausted and the physical plane illness is not. At this particular time, his destiny. Oh, so the illness isn't his destiny. He's paid off his karma. Then the healer can begin to bear upon the situation, if he is spiritual and full of wisdom, enough spiritual energy to ensure a cure. Trust me, you will find these answers suggestive. Ponder deeply upon the implications. So in that second one, maybe somebody's suffering a disease because something they've done wrong in a past life or some misalignment in this life. When they paid off the karma, but the disease hasn't gone away yet, then there's an opportunity for that healing to come. If you have a healer who's sufficiently skilled in that, because there's no spiritual reason for that to affect them anymore. They're not paying a debt. They're not learning a lesson necessarily. So it can be thrown off if enough skill is brought to bear on that. And the other one, he's saying if you make contact with your soul, often it's kind of an unexpected way. It'll sweep through your vehicles and be able to bring about a healing. And so, and we will move on to the next quote. And by the way, if you're enjoying this, please leave a like. It'd really help out the stream, and I would appreciate it. So, definite work must also be done in healing, in exercising and curing mental and astral diseases, and it must be demonstrated to the world that the ancient power to heal still lies in the hands of those who consistently follow the Christ. Those who use this power only for the sake of the little ones, taking and seeking no personal reward, can manifest the ancient way to heal, which has small resemblance to the modern methods of the mental schools. And I think the mental schools he's referring to is basically just, think good thoughts, like sort of mentalism and Christian Science type of stuff. So energy follows thought, that's true. There's a little bit of resemblance there, but not too much. Preparation, too, must be given to the development of the higher psychic powers, and through the trained expression of those powers can proof be given to the scientists of the world of the latent forces in man, which can be utilized by those who wisely and sanely follow in the footsteps of the Christ, the greatest psychic of all time. Hospitals and schools will soon appear under the direct guidance of the masters. Teachers who can heal will come forth, and others will appear who will train the minds of pupils to be responsive to direct inspiration from above. The faculty of the intuition must be developed scientifically. And so, the masters see things in longer terms than we do. So what they mean by soon might be longer than we normally think. That being said, a number of things the Tibetans seem to have predicted or hoped would happen haven't really manifested. And we certainly haven't seen sort of healing schools under the masters that are demonstrating these things so much that science has acknowledged them. And it just brings me back to this idea that particularly after World War II, people kind of weren't that interested in fighting the good fight. I mean, the good fight wasn't going to war at that point. It was, I guess on the home front, so to speak, developing consciousness and putting good works into effect. Not that nobody was, but just the quality and the percentage of humanity who were following that seemingly hasn't measured up to what we could have done. And a lot of these great developments in society and for humanity weren't possible because there wasn't enough of us reaching upward. You have that picture of Adam and God, not picture, that painting where Adam's reaching up and God's reaching toward him. And if we're not reaching up enough, God's not necessarily going to do all the extra reaching, but it's the saying, God helps those who help themselves. And so if we put in the effort, the best effort we can as humanity, then we'll be able to create that bridge and manifest the higher things into the human kingdom someday. But yeah, something to consider. And just if there's something you can be doing that you're not, just put in that little extra effort, and it might go farther than you think. So moving along to the final quote for consideration. I like this image. This woman healing somebody else. Rule 4, and obviously this was from a set of rules, but we're just going to focus on this one. The healer and the healing group must keep the will in leash. It is not will that must be used, but love. This is the last rule of great importance. The concentrated will of any individual and the directed will of a united group should never be employed. The free will of the individual must never be subjected to the impact of a powerfully focused group or individual. It is far too dangerous a procedure to be permitted. Will energy, particularly that of a number of people simultaneously playing upon the subtle and physical bodies of the one to be healed, can greatly increase the trouble instead of curing it. It can stimulate the disease itself to dangerous proportions and disrupt instead of cooperating with nature's healing forces, and can even eventually kill the person concerned by so increasing the disease that the patient's normal resistance can prove futile. I would ask you, therefore, in any group work of healing, to keep the will and even keen desire in abeyance. Only initiates of a high degree are permitted to cure by the power of will, focused in the word of power. And this will only be because they can test the capacity of the patient, the tension of the disease, and know also whether or not it is the will of the soul that the disease should be cured. So it might not be the will of the soul. It might be that that person's karma or some lesson they have to learn has to do with the disease progressing on and maybe even killing them, perhaps. But yeah, so when people are experimenting or developing healing and they're not at some like super high level, um, it's important to not use the will or even, as he says, keen desire to actively try to heal the person. And that the bringing in of love is the most important factor, because most people aren't of a caliber to be able to effectively use the will without causing a lot of trouble for the patients. So those are the quotes for today. I'm interested in any thoughts or comments. If you found it useful, please give me a comment down there, and we'll talk about it further. But until next time, it's been Joshua's Magic. Farewell, everybody.